we're considering Enoch's 3 arguments for the objectivity of morality. And right in this video, we're considering his first argument alone. And that argument is based off of a joke. He tells the following joke, and he asks for our reaction as to whether it's funny or not. So there's a kid sitting at the table. The kid says, "I'm really glad that I don't like spinach." And his mom says, "Why?" And he says, "Because then I would eat it, and spinach is gross." Okay, is it a funny joke? Maybe tell me whether you think it is in the comments. If you don't think it's funny, you can at least see why someone would think it's funny, in the way that you kind of give a pity laugh to a dad joke or something. You can see how it could be perceived as a joke or given as a joke. It fits into the category of joke, even though it may not be funny to you. Right? The reason that it's funny is because if he really did like spinach, it wouldn't be gross to eat spinach. Right? He's saying, I'm really glad I don't like it because then I would eat it and it's bad. But in the hypothetical scenario in which he does like it, it's actually not bad to eat it, and it's not gross to him in that scenario. So that's what makes it funny, right? Explaining the joke never really makes it any funnier. It usually takes the humor away, what humor there was. But that's what made that joke at least fit into the category of joke, even if you're not amused by it. So now we need to consider a second sort of joke, and we just need to tell the same sort of joke about the Earth being flat. So imagine someone saying, they live in 2021, and they say, "I'm really glad that I don't live in whatever year, 1000 BC. And someone says, "Why?" And they say, "Well, because then I would believe that the Earth was flat, and that's false." Now, this joke is not funny. And furthermore, it's probably incorrect to even call it a joke. It doesn't even sound like a joke. You can't even give it the pity laugh, right? As you would a dad joke. You don't even see, when you hear this joke, what would convince someone that it even is a joke. Why? You can't even begin to sympathize with someone who thinks it's funny in the way that you could with the spinach joke. And why is that? Well, because the element that made the spinach joke funny is gone from this case, right? The spinach joke was funny because changing your preferences changes the facts about whether spinach is gross. And so of course it wouldn't make sense to be happy that you're not eating spinach where you like it. But in this case, changing the facts about your beliefs that the Earth is flat doesn't actually change whether the Earth is round or flat. And so you don't get that funny element, or that at least element that makes it a plausible joke. Okay, so we should compare these two jokes. And what we see is that whether this joke is funny, the joke that fits into this form is funny, kind of gives us a clue as to whether the domain in question is subjective or objective. Right? The spinach joke is funny precisely because our preferences, or whether spinach is gross or not, depends on our preferences. The flat Earth joke is not funny because whether the Earth is flat or not does not depend on our beliefs about whether it's flat or not. Okay, so that should tell us, Enoch says, we have a somewhat reliable guide then to determining whether something is objective or subjective by seeing whether fitting it into a joke like this is funny or not. So now let's consider a moral case of this joke. And suppose someone living in America says, "I'm really glad I wasn't born here 200 years ago, because then I would be a racist." Probably. Odds are. And racism is bad. Now, is this a funny joke? Enoch says it doesn't seem really, it seems much more in the category of the flat Earth joke than the spinach joke. Right? It's not funny because we tend to think, well, yeah, racism is bad even if you're a racist, right? You're changing your beliefs about whether racism is okay does not change the fact whether racism is okay. So it's like the flat Earth joke. Changing your beliefs about whether the Earth is flat doesn't change whether the Earth is flat. Whereas changing your preferences about spinach does change whether spinach is gross or not. So changing whether you believe whether you're a racist or not does not change whether racism is bad. And so it seems like that's the case. That's why we don't find this joke funny. Right? So Enoch says, this is pretty good evidence that at least some moral claims are true objectively. Racism is bad, that's objectively true, right? We just saw that this joke is not funny, which seems to indicate that your beliefs and preferences about racism don't change whether racism is okay. Okay, so what can someone who wants to push back against Enoch here say? So if you're a subjectivist, or what many call a relativist about morality, you think morality is all relative to the person or maybe the culture's beliefs or preferences or approvals and disapprovals or something like that. What can you say in response to this? Well, look, I think it would be tempting to say, well, how can you tell anything from jokes? But that's not really what's going on here. The jokes are kind of getting at something deeper about whether the facts change with our preferences, whether the truth of these claims change with our mental states or not. Right? And what makes the joke funny is that, and that's what we're trying to get at. So I see two responses that you could make to Enoch here if you're a relativist about morality. The first is you could double down, so to speak. You could say, I actually think the racism joke is funny, precisely because if I were a racist, racism wouldn't be bad. That's one thing you could say. So I think you'd probably be forcing a laugh if you said, aha, yeah, I actually find this one funny, right? And that means that's because racism is like the grossness of spinach. It's just subjective. I don't think that's a really promising route. On the other hand, you could admit that the racism joke is not funny and just say, give some sort of explanation for why our reaction to this joke is unreliable in telling whether morality is objective or subjective. So you could say, well, unlike our preferences about spinach, our moral preferences run way deeper and they're more fixed in us. So it's really hard to consider those sorts of hypothetical scenarios in which we lack the moral opinions that we have. It's harder to imagine our moral beliefs and preferences being different from what they are, whereas it's easier to imagine liking or disliking spinach. So you could say it's just hard for us to consider that hypothetical. And if we truly could, then we would see that the facts of the matter do change with our preferences or beliefs or whatever. But it does, the deep-rootedness of our opinions about this does prevent us from thinking this sort of joke is funny. So that's another sort of reply you can make. You can either force the laugh and say, I'm adamant, I am biting down on this bullet, doubling down and saying this joke is funny. Or you could admit that it's not funny, but give sort of an explanation of why morality is subjective, but we don't think this sort of joke is funny.